Probably about another 30 seconds or so to file in. Hope everyone is having a wonderful DrupalCon. I was just mentioning to Sarabi, I literally just came in about 15 minutes ago, so I'm really sorry I missed the opening session. I hear it was excellent, and I will have to go back and catch the recording. But as I am in the United States, it is currently 8 in the morning, so this was about as early as I could get up. And but I am really, really happy to be here. Really happy to uh, you know get to connect with folks. Still virtually, but hopefully in person soon. Um, yeah. So good afternoon for everyone in Europe. Good morning for anybody who might be coming in from the Western Hemisphere, and good other times of the day for others. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Session is Thorny Problems and Open Source Community Management. A little bit about me. My name is George Demet. I use he, him pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at gdemet. So I have been active in the Drupal community for quite some time, going all the way back to 2007. I am the founder and co-CEO, along with Tiffany Ferris, of Palantir.net. We are a open source consultancy based in the United States. And so, like I said, been active in the Drupal community for quite some time. Variety of different community roles. I have worked on Drupal.org and the content moderation queue. I was on the Drupal.org sort of content and redesign working group about a decade ago. Along with Tiffany, we co-chaired and helped organize DrupalCon Chicago back in 2011. And but what I'm here today to talk about is the role I held primarily. I held from 2013 up until the beginning of this year as a founding member of the Drupal Community Working Group's conflict resolution team. So while I have stepped down from sort of active involvement and engagement in in the conflict resolution side, so I no longer receive incident reports as they come in, I'm still very involved with the team. We have a community health team that works to, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, that works to provide sort of proactive and works on proactive initiatives around community health. I do also sometimes kind of step in and help out the team, either to provide information or context, or to work with folks on sort of long-standing issues from my time on the conflict resolution team. The other thing, of course, that's there. So back in 2012, I was one of the folks who helped author the first version of the Drupal's Code of Conduct for Events. What was known as the DrupalCon Code of Conduct. That's a separate from our Community Code of Conduct. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I want to kind of start by talking a little bit about what makes Drupal different from a community and community management and governance perspective than most other open source projects. So many open source projects are maintained by individual developers. If you go on GitHub, that's sort of the majority of projects there are, the very classic developer scratches an itch, writes some code, releases it out, and is sort of solely responsible for maintaining the project. A lot of others are overseen by large technology companies. So Google, Facebook, and Microsoft are responsible for sponsoring and supporting a lot of open source projects. They provide a lot of governance and scaffolding around that. There are also nonprofit foundations like Linux, Apache, and Mozilla that are responsible for uh, really supporting, maintaining, and providing that support, community and technical governance support for their projects. So conversely, Drupal is a largely independent project. We're not controlled by any single company or entity. We're supported by a community of hundreds of thousands of companies, or sorry, hundreds of companies, thousands of individuals who lend their time, talent, and treasure to support and maintain the project. We do have the Drupal Association. The Drupal Association provides a lot of support for the project, but historically they've not been involved in really driving the technical direction or governance of the project. They're really here to make sure that we have events like DrupalCon, that we have Drupal.org to really provide that kind of support. But again, they don't have a heavy hand in controlling the project like Google does with a sponsored project, for example. So what that means is that our community includes a very broad and diverse array of independently run in-person and virtual community spaces. And, a lot of different individuals who work for different companies, who work for, maybe independent hobbyist developers. And what that means is that, if you have a project, for example, um, that's run by a large company, and again, I'll just use Google as an example, and there's a conflict between two of the, main developers of the project, chances are pretty good that those two folks are employed by the same company, and that means the company can use its HR resources. We don't really have that in Drupal. Everyone, is largely, independent. So it does make our situation a little more interesting, a little bit more complicated. Um, the other thing about Drupal is that we were actually one of the very first major open source projects to adopt a code of conduct. So again, just sort of laying a little bit of context and background. I'm going to provide a very, very brief history of how that all happened and where we are today. So going all the way back to 2010, Moshe Weitzman proposed that a Drupal adopt a code of conduct, very specifically the Ubuntu code of conduct. And there was not a lot of um, argument or debate. Everyone kind of really agreed that as our community was growing at the time, as more people were coming in, that this was a good idea, that the Ubuntu code was a good one at the time. And so adopted it largely intact. The only kind of real modification that was made at the time was that there was a section on the conflict resolution process, what to do if people have a disagreement. And that section, when we adopted it back in 2010, was kind of left blank. It was like to be added later. So we had a code of conduct. We didn't really have any way to uphold or enforce it. So it was largely kind of on the honor system. It was something that was enforced by different people in the community in different ways at different times in different ways, and those ways were not always consistent. Um, we also had a number of situations come up where people were experiencing harassment and abuse from other people in the community, and there wasn't any clear path about what to do about it. And so we had some unfortunate situations that occurred. We had some really great people that left the community. So there was kind of a widespread recognition that something needed to be done. So in the summer of 2012, Dries held a governance sprint and got a number of folks from the community together to really kind of sit down and think about this question of not just how do we make sure our code of conduct is enforced and our community is well managed, but also to answer some other kind of questions about technical direction and governance and how decision making is distributed throughout the project and community. And so the result of that was a number of working groups. One of those working groups was the community working group, and the idea was that this would be the group that would be responsible for supporting and enforcing and upholding the Drupal Community Code of Conduct. But beyond that, the charter still needed to be worked out. This group, there was a little bit of discussion back and forth about who this group should report to. And essentially, it was decided at the time that the group would report directly to Dries, as there was no one else at the time, no other person or entity to whom it really made sense that anyone could think of. So that happened in 2012. At the same time, the Drupal Association, which is responsible for running and licensing events like DrupalCon, adopted a code of conduct for their events. And so the difference is, so we have the community code of conduct, which is really about sort of the basic expectations for how people will interact with each other in the community, whether that is sort of in a community space like, back at the time, it was the IRC channels, now it's Slack, whether it is in the issue queues on Drupal.org or wherever. The event code of conduct is one that applies to how people interact with each other in a physical space. And that one is a little bit more specific in terms of what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior. So then in 2013, the CWG was chartered. The first thing we did as a group was to develop incident report and conflict resolution processes, basically filling in those blanks from the community code of conduct. We added that anti-harassment language into the code of conduct and essentially went and started working through our backlog of issues. I am seeing someone say they are seeing a blank screen. If anyone else is experiencing that issue, let me know in the channel and I can maybe try and unshare and reshare my slides. So we continued on that way for a few years. And we were actually just starting at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017 to kind of think about some improvements to the community working groups processes as the community was continuing to grow, and we were continuing to see that as a 4-person volunteer group, we needed a little bit of help in terms of managing the different issues that were coming up, as well as doing the things we wanted to be able to do to help support the community and its health. So that got a little bit upended in the spring of 2017. There was a significant community issue, which I'm not going to go into today. But the result was that there were a lot of things came to the surface, and there was a series of community discussions. Whitney Hess led a number of groups at DrupalCon in the spring of 2017. There was also a survey that went around in the summer, and a group that was working on that into the fall of 2017. And out of that came a series of proposals to help improve community governance, a number of which applied to providing clearer oversight and clarity around the role of the community working group. And what happens when there's an issue where the community working group makes a decision and one of the folks involved wants to appeal that decision. So we spent the kind of following year working on those issues um, and working with folks at the Drupal Association and folks in the community on making some changes to our charter. And we did that. We adopted our new charter in 2019. I'll talk a little bit in the next slide about the changes that were made, but the goal was really to provide clear oversight and increase community accountability. Coming out of that, the community working group created the community health team, which is a group of folks from the community who specifically focus on proactive community health tasks. Some of the things the group works on are code of conduct training for folks in the community. If you've seen on Drupal.org, there are now, we call them nudges. They're essentially kind of pre-scripted language that folks can use if it looks like something in a Drupal.org issue is a conversation is getting a little bit heated or out of hand. It's just a little language that we can that folks can paste in to kind of get the conversation back on track. So sort of the next major initiative, and this is actually something I am working on, and I'm saying this publicly as a way of holding myself accountable for working on it. We're taking a look at, because if you go back, we've had largely the same community code of conduct for the last decade. Things have changed a lot in that time. And so we are reviewing our community code of conduct to see if it makes sense to either revise it, to update it, to maybe replace it with something different. And I'm hoping that within the next few months, we can start sharing more of that work with the community. Okay, so one more slide that kind of provides a little bit of background. So here is where we are today. So with regard to the community code of conduct is maintained and enforced by a volunteer team. That's the community working group's conflict resolution team. That group is overseen by a review panel. And so the review panel consists of the two community elected board members, Drupal Association board members, plus an outside expert who's John O'Bacon. And they provide both oversight and support for that conflict resolution team. And so, one, I want to make sure folks are aware of that because we actually do have Drupal Association community board elections open right now. And I think not a lot of people realize this, but you are voting for someone who will help oversee the community working group. So that's really important to keep in mind. And the other aspect of it is that if there is an issue that comes up, and either the community working group is like, we need some help, or if they make a decision and someone involved says, I'd like to appeal that decision, that review panel is the first place where that goes. And so the idea is because that 2/3 of this group is elected by the community, there is community accountability there. The third person, the outside expert, is appointed by the board of the Drupal Association as a whole. So that's how things work in the community. And when I say the community, again, I'm talking about how we interact with each other in general outside of in-person or virtual events like this one, right? Although we do kind of still expect that folks will follow, the community code of conduct, even when interacting with each other in those spaces. However, when you're interacting with each other, we get a little bit more specific. So there is an event code for DrupalCon, and that is enforced by Drupal Association staff. So I see Rachel Lawson is here at the event. She's one of the folks who's responsible for, helping out if there is a code of conduct issue at a DrupalCon or other Drupal Association event. And then there's our wide array of local Drupal camps and meetups who enforce their own codes of conduct. But they also have guidance and support from the community working group as needed. And I know over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of interaction between the CWG and various event organizers. All right, so I have just spent 20 minutes providing context and background. Let us get into the meat of our presentation. All right, so these are some of the thorny problems we and others have encountered. And I want to be really clear. This is not about any individual person or issue. I actually had someone who I had worked with in the past on an issue reach out to me and say, "Hey, I see that you're going to be at DrupalCon talking about this thing. Are you going to be talking about me?" And I said, "Actually, no. The Yes, we worked on that issue with you, but you're not the only person we've worked on that issue with. And in fact, it's not just that we've worked on this issue with other people in the Drupal community. I know that other open source communities have had to deal with similar issues. Okay. So when I talk here, some of you may be thinking, like, oh, I heard about that thing. Is this about this person? Well, no, it is. These are common issues that come up all the time. So, all right, so we'll go through these, but essentially the four I'm going to talk about today, and there are many, many more, but these are the four I'm going to talk about today. Harassment that occurs outside of community designated community spaces, how to handle unreported incidents, things that happen but that you may not receive a formal report about, enforcing event bans, and accountability, redemption, and reconciliation. And let's be clear, as I go through, I'm going to talk about each of these issues. I'm going to talk about some possible approaches, um, but there are no clear answers to these things, and that is why they are thorny problems. So let's go into the first one. Problem number one, harassment that occurs outside of community spaces. So, online harassment is something that has become a huge issue in the last few years, particularly on social media. And many popular open source codes of conduct restrict their scope to designated community spaces or individuals who are officially representing the community. Um, and there are some people who believe that no matter what they say or do outside of a project space, only their behavior inside the project should matter. Um, I disagree with this. And one other thing, I'm no longer on the conflict resolution team. So what I say here is my opinion. It does not represent necessarily the views of the conflict resolution team. Um, you know, but I'm able to be a little more open about things, but I want to be clear. I'm representing myself in this conversation. So if the folks on the CWG team agree or disagree with me, they're free to to share that. So I believe that if you are harassing or attacking someone on social media, um, you you can't then turn around and expect that same person to collaborate with you on the project, right? It's absurd. Um, and so that is one of the reasons I believe that, like, an open source code of conduct needs to be really clear and say, look, um, if you're saying, you know, John Doe, if I go on Twitter and I say John Doe is a terrible person, I hate them and everything they stand for, and then the next day I want to work on an issue with John Doe, is John Doe going to want to work with me knowing that I think they are the world's worst person and that I hate everything they stand for? Probably not. So, that's one of the reasons I think it's really important to make sure that your code of conduct at least addresses or encompasses in some way, um, you know, particularly online harassment, even if it occurs outside of a community space. Uh, you know, The other sort of thing we've seen is several cases where community members were subjected to campaigns of anonymous harassment on social media. So this is really challenging to address because we may have a suspicion about who is behind, and there may even be circumstantial evidence linking an individual in the community to these campaigns. Um, but we can't we can't prove who's behind them. They may deny it if we ask. And of course, as I think we all know by now, the platforms involved either can't or won't take action. I think there was an interview last night here in the United States on the American news program 60 Minutes. And you probably heard about um, this Facebook whistleblower who's like, actually, you know, getting people to argue with each other helps drive engagement for Facebook. So they're okay with it. So that's a problem because we're here to collaborate, we're here to work together, and we definitely can disagree, and that's fine. But we do need to treat each other with dignity and respect. So, going to that third point, which is that public expressions of discriminatory views and or hate speech by high-profile community members also negatively impacts the community, even when it occurs outside of community spaces, right? You can be a perfect professional inside a community space, but if everyone knows that you are, part of a hate group in your free time, that is going to impact, how you are viewed within the community spaces and how your community is viewed by others. So it is important. So, all right, so let's take a look at some possible solutions. So I already talked about the first one, defining the scope of your community more broadly to include interactions between community members regardless of venue. We do need to carve out some exceptions here. If it's two individuals who are in the community, but they're having a dispute that does not involve or relate to the project at all, like a workplace dispute, that is not something that should be covered under the code of conduct. That is a private matter between them. Likewise, if it is a matter where police or other law enforcement are involved, and there's no imminent threat to the community or members of the community, or potential threat, then again, that is not a matter that a code of conduct enforcement group can handle. Um, Focusing on the impact of an individual's words or actions rather than when or where they happened or what they intended. This is something we see a lot, that people are like, oh, I didn't mean to offend so and so. I'm sorry that so and so was offended. But the bottom line is that folks do need to take responsibility for their words and actions. Um, and if they were misunderstood, it is their responsibility to address that. Again, hey, people can have whatever political views they want. But again, you should expect to be held accountable for opinions that undermine your ability to collaborate with other community members. If somebody says something, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, anti Semitic, whatever, you are going to have to take responsibility for that. And if it undermines your ability to collaborate with other community members, then that is something that is going to have to be addressed. All right, let's talk about our second problem. Handling unreported incidents. So we, again, have heard this all the time. So there may be rumors that that there's an alleged harasser, that somebody is engaging in harassing or unwelcome behavior at events, for example. And this may be circulating in back channels and whisper networks. And it may be something that a lot of people know about, but there have been either no official reports made to the Code of Conduct enforcement authorities, or there's not sort of sufficient information um, to take action, right? Um, and there's a lot of reasons this might not happen, very legitimate reasons. You may be reluctant to file a report because you're afraid you'll get blamed for any actions taken against the harasser. You may be concerned that it will lead to more harassment or backlash or whatever. So that's very legitimate. Um, there are also but the consequence of this, of course, right, is that if these things continue to happen, they they may lose faith in the community's ability to address these issues, or in the code of conduct enforcement groups' effectiveness. If they know there's stuff going on, but they don't see action being taken. So, what do we do about this? Well, here are some possible solutions. One, allowing anonymous and informal reports, which is something the CWG I know has done for the last few years now. Um, being when someone reports something to you, being very open about how those reports are handled, what information will and will not be shared publicly, um, and being really, really clear that information circulated on whisper networks or other back channels is not on its own actionable, right? It may need to be corroborated. So if you say, I heard that so and so harassed another person, unless you can, someone comes forward who either witnessed or experienced that behavior, a third party, sort of hearsay thing is not on its own enough. If we have multiple reports from multiple, individuals, and particularly individuals who have first or secondhand knowledge of the event, that's a little bit different. And, but on its own, I heard that this thing happened is not enough for, um, to warrant a code of conduct enforcement action. Um, again, so really, again, if this comes forward, it's like, who knows about this? And then communicating directly and privately with that person who has, secondhand knowledge of an incident. Um, I didn't say always say firsthand here, because sometimes if someone has been the target or victim of a really bad thing, you don't necessarily want to go directly to that person if they're still processing some trauma. But if there is someone with secondhand knowledge who can speak to it, that is another option. Okay, so let's talk about problem 3, and this one is one I think we still are working on, and it's something that many open source communities are working on, enforcing event bans, right? Open source communities are by their nature decentralized. Local event organizers don't always talk to each other. We do have in Drupal a really great event organizers group, but there are still very many events that occur that involve people who are not in that group, right? Um, and just because someone has been banned from one event, they may not, other groups are not necessarily aware that that's occurred. Um, there are also some times when an event is like, I know this person has been banned. I don't agree with the reasons they were banned. So I'm going to go ahead and invite them to speak at my event anyway, because it will draw attention and notoriety to my event. So that sometimes happens. Um, Another thing that's come up, particularly in the last 2 years, is that, if, um, if events are virtual, people who are not supposed to be attending events can just sort of hide their identity and surreptitiously attend anyway. We know that that's happened, and, yeah, and then this has been a very long discussion. Again, I don't have time to into all of it today, but for various reasons, it's very often not possible to publish or share a list of people who have been banned from events. So, what do we do about this? Um, so, one, making it really clear if you're banned from a physical event, that also extends to virtual events. And also making it really clear what the consequences are for evading a ban. So, we may say, hey, look, you are, banned from events. and if you but you're still allowed on Drupal.org or on Slack or whatever. But if you evade this ban, you may be removed from those other spaces as well. You can also say, look, hey, you're going around, you're going to events you're not supposed to be going to. We'll just be public about it, right? And that alone is another kind of tool we have. None of them are perfect. None of them are great. We have talked to in the past a lot of event organizers who don't want to invite a banned person and want to know how they can get around that. Well, and some of them, sometimes Code of Conduct Committees, CWG, can review the list of speakers and attendees. And then if there is an issue, they can reach out to someone who shouldn't be there. And the event organizer doesn't have to even be involved. And there are some communities, again, Drupal, because of its decentralized nature, is a little bit, this is a little bit more challenging, but I know we've spoken with people in WordPress and other communities who really can take action against events that deliberately invite banned speakers. They can revoke their privilege to hold further officially sanctioned events. That is a little bit more challenging. Thank you. 10 minutes left. All right. So, and I do want to leave some time for some Q&A because I suspect some people have some questions. So, last problem, accountability, redemption, reconciliation. This is one of the most challenging things. And I know I've spoken with folks across many different communities, and no one has a good answer for this. So, for folks who have been banned, and when I talk about banned, it may be from one or more community spaces, it is really difficult for those individuals to find a path back to re-engagement. And there is a question about whether that even should happen. Um, you know, because what we see is that damage caused by an individual impacts the entire community, not just those directly involved. You may think about it as an argument between two individuals, but all of this happens in the open. Other people see this. Other people see what's going on, and it negatively impacts everyone who not just is a direct participant, but who observes what happens, right? So that means that in order for anyone who's been banned to have a hope of coming back, they need to repair the damage. They need to rebuild trust with the community, and they need to show that they're willing to hold themselves accountable for their past behavior. And no matter what you do, there are some community members who may object to any previously banned individual being allowed to return under any circumstances. And that, again, is something that you're going to have to address. So, possible solutions, right? And I see, thank you. Yes, restorative justice principles. We're trying to figure it out. Being upfront that if they want to come back, it's not an easy path. There will be setbacks. What we've done in the past for folks who are sincerely sorry, who have undergone a personal transformation, who do want to address that. We've talked with other people who know that individual, with their permission, of course, to assess the level and sincerity of their transformation. Is this just something someone is saying to us, or do they really believe it? Obviously, talking with those who are most directly impacted by the individual's past behavior before doing anything. Sometimes they're like, you know what, that still hurts. They still need to take action. Sometimes they're like, you know what, that happened a long time ago. I've moved on. And if they've changed, I'm okay with it. But you got to talk to those folks. And then it's sort of a gradual re-engagement. So it's like, okay, you're banned from all community spaces. What if we try out just this one community space? Let's see how it goes. If it works out, then we can talk about more. If it doesn't, then we can just pull back. And even with all of this, right, you got to be prepared for the person to walk away if they encounter resistance, because this is hard. And we've had folks who we've worked with who have it's been fits and starts. They wanted to engage with the process, they've encountered resistance. They're like, I can't do this right now. Okay, fine. We're here. We'll be there when you're ready to go to the next step. So, again, there's this bell hooks quote that we use. It's been a guiding principle for me, at least, for many years. That forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? Right? Again, people need to take responsibility for the impact of their words and actions. It's not just enough to be sorry for what you did or feel regret or remorse. True accountability requires a commitment to work to repair the damage that you've caused and work proactively to make your community stronger, right? So going back to that question, what does restorative justice look like within the context of an open source community? I don't know yet, but I would love to figure this out. Finally, when in doubt, ask for help. In Drupal, community leaders, event organizers, anyone has access to the CWG. It's not just a place to file reports. It's a place to say, I'm dealing with this situation and I don't know what to do. Can you help me out? And they are happy to do so. We have code of conduct training in our community. Courses are offered once every month or two. This is a great way, especially if you're an event organizer, to know how to handle difficult situations that might come up at your events. And the CWG themselves also have access to trusted advisors and peers, not just within Drupal, but across the open source ecosystem. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump over to the Q&A tab and see what questions folks have. Rachel asks, what is a community space? Yes. Defining that is very it's challenging and it's important, right? So we've talked about community spaces. Drupal.org is a community space. Drupal Slack is a community space. A Drupal event is a community space. We're in a community space right now. There are local communities who have their own meetups, who have their own chat channels and Slack groups and everything. Those are community spaces. They're self-organized. They're not run or controlled by anyone other than those local communities, but they are part of the community. And so I personally would take a very broad definition of a community space. Let me see. All right. Peter asks, if you were, I would, okay, yeah, if you were looking to start out using Drupal, would you use Drupal Code of Conduct Principles as a foundation? I actually would probably not start with our Code of Conduct. As I've mentioned, it's old, it's outdated, it needs updating. I would start with one of the common codes of conduct that are out there. There's the I'm blanking on the name of it. The very popular one that many open source projects use. I do think Drupal's values and principles are something to look at. There's a lot of really great ideas there. But those are things that inform a code of conduct. And with a code of conduct, especially if you're starting out with a small project, you probably want to be really clear in terms of like, hey, these are the kinds of behaviors that are welcome and unwelcome. Yeah, but I wouldn't start with Drupal's code of conduct. All right, we have another Q&A here. Oh, same question over there. All right. I have time for one more question. If anyone has one, go ahead and type it in. Sorry, and I was just taking a look. Contributor. So there's contributor covenant. Is that popular one I was thinking of? There are a ton of them. Yeah, it's, Django has a pretty good one. There's a ton of them out there. Yeah, thank you. Yes, contributor covenant. Um, any other questions? All right. Well, I will let you all go then. Oh, wait, I see one more. One more. Any tools I wish I had to be more effective. Rachel, boy, oh boy, and I think you could probably speak to this as well. If we had like money and professional support staff, that would be kind of amazing. That would increase capacity tremendously. But I also know that this is the kind of thing that is really hard to do. Um, yeah. And I see the other question. Introducing people to restorative conflict resolution who are used to a cursorial model, that's hard. Lots of conversations before we even kind of get into next steps and what things look like. There are usually just lots of conversations. All right. Thank you all. I will be sort of hanging around for the next half hour or so. If anyone has any additional questions or anything, I'm still kind of navigating my way around this year's event. So I may be in this channel, I may be elsewhere. We'll see. And again, yeah, thank you, Rachel, for posting that link to the Code of Conduct training workshop. There's one coming up this weekend, and yeah, it's a great way uh, to help out in a way that yeah is a little bit different than regular code contribution. So thank you all.